Okay, let's unpack this. There's this surprising headline that might have just slipped under your radar.
Mhm.
A court, one you've probably never even heard of, just blocked the bulk of some really significant global tariffs.
Right, the Court of International Trade. Yeah, that's a big one.
Exactly. So that's the core of our deep dive today. We're really getting into this, well, fascinating ruling.
Yeah.
It challenges the administration's power to slap on tariffs by declaring an economic emergency.
And we're working from a news report that covers this specific decision, right? Looking at the immediate reactions, some of the legal thinking behind it, gives us a pretty sharp picture.
Yeah, it does. So our mission really is to figure out what this ruling actually means, why the court decided this way.
Which specific tariffs are hit?
Right, exactly which ones. And then what happens next, legally, and maybe most importantly, the economic side, the political side. What's the impact for you?
Okay, let's do it.
So first up, the big headline, tariffs blocked. A federal court has put a stop to the bulk of these global tariffs.
And like you said, it's the U.S. Court of International Trade down in Manhattan. It's usually a pretty low-key part of the federal courts, you know?
Yeah, not one you hear about every day.
But it seems like it's flexing its authority here in a pretty big way.
Definitely. And the ruling itself was, well, decisive. A 3-judge panel agreed to grant an injunction against these tariffs.
And it was unanimous, right? 3-0. That's pretty significant.
Very. Which, of course, sparked some strong reactions almost immediately.
Oh, yeah. Saw some chatter online, people calling it a judicial coup, that kind of thing.
Right, but the report we're looking at adds an interesting wrinkle to that claim. It points out the makeup of the panel.
The judges themselves, appointed by Reagan, Obama, and Trump.
Exactly. So that mix doesn't exactly scream purely partisan move, does it?
No, it suggests maybe something more fundamental about the legal interpretation was going on.
And the impact. Well, the report calls it a huge setback for the administration. Maybe as big a deal in the opposite direction as the tariffs were in the first place.
Wow, so it essentially just pauses those tariffs, for now at least.
That seems to be the effect. Okay, so they're paused. But why? Why did the court rule this way? Let's get into the legal argument.
This really goes to the heart of who controls tariffs in the U.S. Normally, that's Congress, right?
Yeah, constitutionally, it's Congress's power.
But Congress can pass laws giving the president that power in, certain specific circumstances.
Like the IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's the one they used here, wasn't it?
That was the administration's justification, yeah. They declared an international economic emergency under IEPA, pointed to things like trade deficits, global economic conditions.
Okay, but here's the crucial part where the court disagreed. Strongly.
Right. The court, unanimously again, basically said that having trade deficits, well, it's not an economic emergency in the way that law, the IEPA, actually defines it.
Even if those deficits have been going on for, 49 years? The report mentioned that?
Yeah, even then. The court's point was that a long-term situation like that just doesn't fit the legal definition of an emergency needed to trigger those specific presidential powers under IEPA.
So the court saw limits on using these emergency power laws for broad economic policy.
Seems so. The report says their reasoning kind of boils down to a poor fit. Like, this law wasn't built for managing trade deficits this way.
Interesting. So that authority, the court implies, really stays with Congress unless it's delegated very differently.
That seems to be the thrust of it.
Okay, so if the court blocked the bulk of the tariffs, which specific ones are we talking about? It's not all of them, necessarily.
Right. The report clarifies it's most, but maybe not every single one. It singles out 3 main categories that the court declared illegal or suspended for now.
Okay, what's the first?
First, the so-called trafficking tariffs. These were declared way back on January 20th, the administration's first day, aimed mainly at Canada, Mexico, and China.
Got it. January 20th tariffs. What else?
The other 2 groups are the broader worldwide and retaliatory tariffs. These came later, announced on April 2nd, a day the administration called Liberation Day.
Ah, right. What do those include?
Well, there was the 10% tariff applied pretty much across the board on everyone, and then higher ones, 11% up to 50% on certain other countries, plus specific retaliatory tariffs against China announced that same day.
Okay, hold on. So just to be crystal clear, the January 20th ones for Canada, Mexico, China, the April 2nd worldwide 10%, the April 2nd other countries 50%, the April 2nd China retaliatory ones, all of those are now on hold because of this ruling.
That's what the report indicates, yes. All those specific tariff actions are quote, on hold, struck down for the moment.
Which naturally leads to the next question. What about the money? The tariffs already paid under these categories.
Yeah, the report raises that too. And the answer seems to be, well, it's unclear right now. But it does suggest that if this ruling stands, if it goes up the chain and gets upheld, maybe even by the Supreme Court,
Then what?
then other countries could potentially sue to get that money back. The argument being it was, according to this ruling, wrongfully collected.
Wow. Okay. That can be huge sums of money.
Yeah.
So the immediate impact, the reactions, sounds like they were pretty intense.
Oh, definitely. The real-world effect was almost instant. The ruling, as the report puts it, effectively grounds these tariffs, halts them.
And that's a big deal because tariffs were such a key part of their trade strategy.
Exactly. The report calls it incredibly significant for that reason. It throws a massive monkey wrench into their whole approach.
Yeah, I can imagine. Disrupts negotiations too, probably.
Absolutely. The report uses the word havoc. How do you negotiate with other countries when the tariffs you're discussing might just, poof, disappear legally?
Good point. Makes things very uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
And the markets, how do they react? That usually tells a story.
It certainly did here. Markets jumped pretty significantly in after-hours trading right after the news broke. Dow futures up over 1%, S&P 500 about 1.5%, NASDAQ even more.
So Wall Street saw this as a positive development, economically speaking, at least in the short term.
That's a clear signal, yeah. Less friction in trade, potentially lower costs.
And the administration's reaction. We mentioned the judicial coup comment floating around.
Right. Beyond that, the report anticipated, and I think this is probably accurate, that they'd push back hard against, any court having the power to block their policies.
Standard reaction? Maybe. Was there official comment yet?
Not at the time the report came out. They were still waiting on the Justice Department or the White House to weigh in formally.
Okay. So what's the path forward here? This ruling is called a permanent injunction, but that doesn't mean it's the absolute final word, does it?
No, not at all. It's permanent unless or until it's overturned on appeal. This is just the start of the next legal phase, really.
So the administration will appeal.
Oh, almost certainly. Like any federal case where they lose a ruling like this, they have the right to appeal.
What's the very first thing they might try?
Well, the report suggests one possibility is they could ask the Court of International Trade itself, the court that just ruled against them, to temporarily pause its own ruling while the appeal happens.
Huh. Can they do that? Will the court agree?
They can ask. The report notes it's kind of a rare situation, but the court might technically agree to pause it just to let the appeal process play out smoothly. Seems unlikely given they issued the injunction, but it's a procedural step they could take.
Okay. But assuming that doesn't happen, or regardless, the main appeal goes where?
Up one level. To the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. That's the specific appeals court that handles cases from the Court of International Trade.
The Federal Circuit. Got it. And could that court, the appeals court, put the tariffs back in place temporarily while they think about the case?
Yes, that's definitely a possibility. The Federal Circuit could issue what's called a stay. They could pause the lower court's ruling while they hear the full appeal.
And if that happens?
Then, as the report says, it would sort of jolt everything back into place, at least temporarily. The tariffs would be back on until the Federal Circuit makes its final decision on the appeal itself.
This feels like it has Supreme Court written all over it eventually.
Very likely, yeah. The stakes are high, the legal questions are fundamental. The report suggests whoever loses at the Federal Circuit level is highly likely to take it up to the Supreme Court.
Does the report give any clues about how the Supreme Court might lean on this? I know it's speculation, but...
It offers an interesting observation, actually. It points out that some Supreme Court opinions have shown, let's say, skepticism towards the administration's tendency to label things an emergency to unlock certain powers.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
It gives the example of a case involving the Alien Enemies Act, where the court basically said the situation didn't meet the act's trigger of an actual invasion or incursion.
So the thinking is, maybe the Supreme Court would look closely at whether a long-term trade deficit really fits the legal definition of an emergency in the IEPA statute.
That's the implication, that the court might be wary of stretching the definition of emergency too far under these kinds of laws. But again, as you said, it's speculation at this point.
On the timing for all this, appeal, maybe Supreme Court. That could take a while.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't going to be resolved quickly. Federal appeals, especially ones that might reach the Supreme Court, can take many months, even years.
Okay, so let's pull back a bit. Why does this matter to you, listening right now? This isn't just legal nerds arguing in court.
Not at all. This has real-world ripples. It could affect the price you pay for certain goods, if those tariffs stay off or come back on.
Right. Consumer impact.
Definitely. And it impacts the stability of international trade relationships overall. Businesses need predictability.
Mm-hmm. And it's also about that bigger picture, isn't it? The balance of power.
Exactly. Between the president, Congress, and the courts. This case is right at the center of that. Who gets to make these big economic decisions and under what rules?
And it's worth remembering who brought this lawsuit in the first place. According to the report, it wasn't another country.
No, it was a legal advocacy group, but they were representing small businesses, actual companies who argued they were being hurt by these tariffs.
So that really grounds it, shows the direct hit these policies can have on regular businesses and maybe their employees and customers.
Absolutely. And the court's ruling wasn't just for those specific businesses, right?
No, the report emphasizes that. The injunction applies broadly. It covers everyone that would be covered by the tariffs. It's not just limited to the plaintiffs.
Which makes it even more significant, a truly widespread impact.
The report called it a seismic shift. That sounds dramatic, but maybe accurate.
Well, considering it challenges a core tool of the administration's trade policy and the very authority they claim to use it, seismic doesn't feel entirely out of place. It's a major development.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've got a, frankly, surprising ruling from a specialized court, the Court of International Trade.
Putting a halt, at least for now, on major tariffs.
And doing it by challenging the administration's use of emergency powers under a specific law, the IEEPA, questioning the limits of executive power there.
Yeah, the absolute core takeaway from the court seems to be whatever trade deficits are, they don't legally qualify as an economic emergency under that particular statute.
So the final thought for you to consider. What does this episode tell us about the checks and balances in the system, even when powerful actions are taken by the executive branch?
Or maybe think about how much rides on the precise legal definition of a single word, like emergency. How interpreting that one word can shift major economic policy and impact global trade. Something to chew on.